Sausage Company and all those places over there at night.
So you don't like here?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. And this is the second public workshop of 3 for the Technical Assistance Grant Streetscape Program or project. This was actually a technical assistance grant that was offered by SERPED, the Southeast Regional Planning and Economic Development District, to plan ahead of the location of a South Coast rail station at Battleship Cove. So they've offered some of these technical assistance grants to communities along the path so that they can start to plan for what they want either their station to look like or the area around their station. And we have identified that there is a disconnect between downtown and the waterfront. We really want to make that area around the Battleship Cove station more walkable, bikeable, easier to get to through signage, wayfinding, that type of thing. Now there are 3 different projects that are happening kind of all at one time, but we're really being very mindful to coordinate those efforts. This is simply, Eric from Gates Layton will identify the scope that they're working on a lot more clearly, but there is also the spaghetti ramps that are coming down and going to be relocated. That's not part of this project, nor is hopefully the boulevarding of the area of 79 North that DOT is taking a look at now. Although those 3 projects are interrelated, we're looking at this piece, but also mindful of those potential projects later on. Wendy Landman is here. We're looking to have Wendy here today. She's the Executive Director of Walk Boston, and she'll be doing the first part of the project, but right now I will send it off to Eric.
Great, thanks, Michelle. I'll just give a brief introduction of the project area, and then I'll let Wendy have the floor. The project, as defined by SERPED, is essentially looking at the streetscape from the corner down here of Ferry, heading east all the way to Punta Delgada, past the gates of the city, where it turns into Waterstreet and comes down around the corner and then becomes central. So our project corridor is this area here. But as Michelle said, it's very difficult to look only at that corridor without looking at the overall context of the area and the waterfront. And these ramps and bridges that you see in blue and orange represent the Accelerated Bridge Project, which is a project that Jacobs Engineering is working on with Mass Highway. Probably the biggest implication of the redesign of that interchange is the creation of some new connections to the waterfront, particularly this new waterfront drive, which the portion in orange is a bridge, and then it becomes a street, this blue part, that will now be bringing traffic down onto Waterstreet. So it's a big change from the way Waterstreet works today. And then this intersection provides connections to Broadway, back to the north, and connections, of course, back into Milliken and into the city. So about 2 months ago, I was at a workshop up outside of Boston, and Wendy was a presenter talking about why good walking is good for business. And even though this is sort of a forgotten street in some ways, it's a hodgepodge, it has some interesting geometry and angles and curves, not a lot of people think of maybe walking there. It is the gateway to probably the biggest economic engine in the city in Battleship Cove. It's also home to many of the cultural sites and cultural attractions in Fall River. If you go out the door and walk down the hall and look at that big map of all the cultural attractions, I think 7 out of the 14 are located in this area. And it's also the gateway to 1.5 miles of boardwalk that's also highly used. So when is a street just a street? It's actually a gateway streetscape to some of your biggest economic energy engines and your economic resources in the waterfront and the cultural attractions. So I'll turn it over to Wendy and go forward.
Great. Thanks, Eric. The presentation that I'm going to give to you today is not Fall River specific. It's actually one that's specific to pretty much any community that's interested in thinking about economic development and walking and the way that those 2 things relate. One of Walk Boston, and I should say, Walk Boston, notwithstanding our name, we actually work across the state. So I just came here today from Worcester, and we're actually doing some work in the Berkshires and working in Lawrence and working in Brockton, and we really do work all over. We really came to this because as an organization, all of the people in the organization, we were seeing basically every other day a new study would come across our desk talking about different ways that good walking conditions contribute to the economy. And we said, we really need to put something together that summarizes all this information and brings it out to people. And we also need to be able to have conversations with the economic development and business worlds, who are not the people that we're always talking to. We have a lot of interaction with the health world, with the transportation and environmental worlds, but not so much with the business world. And it's really important to make that connection. So what I'm going to do is go through the presentation, and I have a brochure that we put together, which actually summarizes all of the data that I'm going to talk about very quickly. But it actually refers back to the original sources, who has been doing the research on how walking relates to the economy. It's not just Walk Boston saying it. It's, you know, the Brookings Institution and Institute and National Realtors Associations, et cetera, et cetera. It's really not. This isn't coming from the walking advocacy community. It's coming from a broader place. So, what is a walkable community? And again, I'm not going to do, we have something we have called Pedestrian Advocacy 101, which goes into all the sort of different pieces of what makes a community walkable. But sort of this is a really good summary. It's welcoming, it's friendly, it's varied. And of course, it has things like safe conditions and all of that. But when you think about places that are walkable, they can be big cities, they can be small towns, they can be, and I'm not talking now about hiking, which is wonderful but very different. I'm talking about walking in built places. So what we found when we put all this research together is that good walking conditions really impact customers, they impact employees, they impact real estate values, and they also impact public sector spending. And so all of those pieces really come together. So how do you do that? Well, what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about sort of this research and the components of a good walking environment. And then what I'm going to talk about are some inexpensive things that communities can do to help make themselves more walkable that are not the infrastructure pieces, because other people are talking about that here. Eric's going to be talking about that. I mean, there are bits and pieces of it in here, but there are a lot of other things you can do that are very inexpensive. So, again, you know, if you look at this and you take all the pieces apart, it's not a perfect place somehow, but it's a great place to walk around. There are lots of people there, and there are lots of different things going on in that picture. And that's really what counts for walkability. People like to walk around where other people are walking around, and that's really important to keep in mind. Again, if you're on a solitary walk in the country, that feels fine. If you're walking down the street, though, and you're all by yourself, that's not really what's appealing. So it's people. So a couple of the really important things is that for local business, again, for those of us that are trying to support local businesses as opposed to the big box retailers, this is not an anti-big box, but the fact of the matter is that most of the business, most of the economic engine in most American communities comes from local businesses. And local businesses do better and are more likely to stock local items in more walkable communities. That's where they thrive. That's where they pull their customers in. One of the things that many, many communities are thinking about is how to keep and attract younger workers. And again, younger people are looking to be in walkable places. Younger people are driving much less, buying fewer cars, wanting to live in places where they don't need to get in their car for everything. So that's, again, it's a reason to work on walking, to have walkable places, is that it's attracting the kinds of workers that communities are interested in holding on to. It's something that big places and small places are both thinking about. How do you make the community attractive to young people? So this is, you know, one of the findings that's coming out. There have been some recent research, which I don't believe that I have a slide on, about literally about the driving. How much less young people are driving than they were even 10 or 15 years ago. The vehicle miles traveled that young people are generating is much lower per person. Employers. So when employers are trying to keep their employees happy, if they're in places that are isolated from the kinds of things that workers want to use, whether it's lunch or dry cleaners or banks, you have suburban campuses sort of having to build those things in the suburban campuses to keep their employees happy. Whereas if you're in a walkable place, the employer themselves don't have to provide that. That's what people go out and use. And there's a synergy that employees are going out and spending money in the community, and the employer is not investing in and subsidizing lunch because there's no place to get it. So thinking about that relationship, both internal and external, to the employer is very important. So it basically reduces costs to the employers and provides what the employees are looking for. And if you look at the big suburban campuses that some of the really big employers are building, they are literally building all this stuff into their suburban campuses because there's no access to it for employees. So another piece for employers that's really, really important is employee wellness. So being in a place where employees can walk, either to walk during, get out and take a walk, or, and something that Walk Boston thinks a lot about, take transit to work, can actually contribute to employee health because people are getting physical activity. So one of the important pieces of research that's out there is that people who take transit to work are 50% more likely to get the physical activity every day that the Surgeon General recommends than people that drive to work. So if your town centers are transit accessible and walkable, then the chances that people are going to get the physical activity they need are raised. So over the long term, this isn't that you're going to see one-to-one, you build your business here and you're suddenly going to see a big drop in employee health costs. But those things are actually related. And over the long term, as we're thinking about our communities, it's very important to keep that in mind and to think about the places we have new business and new jobs, making them walkable. So of course, older communities like Fall River, older communities that Massachusetts has many of, are in a perfect place to do that. You have capacity here, you have a place that you have places that can be attractive. So making sure that those places work for employers is really important, and then the benefits that come from this can flow to the employers that you're talking with. Likewise, for state and municipal budgets, as I'm sure everybody in the room knows, I mean, healthcare costs for the public is also huge. So that same thing applies, as does the savings that flow to the public sector from compact development that makes use of existing infrastructure. So if you're building economic development in locations where you already have water and sewer, you already have a basic street network, you already have investment in schools and investment in police and fire, is much more efficient for the public sector than greenfield development in a place where you're putting all that in place to start over. So those are both places, ways in which walkable development that's making use of existing infrastructures is cost effective. Then another place that we see a lot of research coming out is on the relationship between walkability and the real estate market. There is a huge undermet demand for housing in walkable communities. So most of the research out there has actually focused on this combination of the baby boomers and then people in their 30s and 20s. Those are both markets where there's a huge demand for walkable communities and where that is a prime driver for the real estate market. There's some new research that just came out in the last couple of weeks that since the recession of the last 4 years, the new investment in exurbia has dropped precipitously. Basically, the real estate market in the exurbs is drying up all around the country, and the places that have held value have been the walkable communities, the communities with access to shops and restaurants and cultural resources. So again, we're in a place where walking is really high on the list of amenities, if you will, that people are looking for in making a real estate investment or buying a home. And again, basically, all of the prognosticators about the real estate market are saying that's where the growth is going to be over the next 25 years in walkable communities. How many of you are familiar with WalkScore? Not so many. Okay. So WalkScore is this amazing app, if you will, that was developed by a small company that's, you can type in any address in the United States and get a score, a walk score for that location. And, you know, the highest is 100 and the lowest, I assume, is 0. And WalkScore, the algorithm that's used to generate a WalkScore has to do with the number of different kinds of uses that are within different distances from that address. So it's not getting into yet. They're working on it. They're always doing things to it. It doesn't yet talk about the quality of the walking environment and whether they're good sidewalks and all of that. This is really about land use. And what it's saying is if an address has, you know, 100 restaurants and 3 movie theaters and 4 schools in half a mile, it's very walkable. WalkScore has just come out with transit score and bike score as well. So you can actually look at how transit accessible different addresses are and how bike accessible they are. But from the walking perspective, the thing that's so interesting is, first of all the big real estate companies now are posting WalkScores on all of their commercial listings, whether it's for residential or office, whether it's for rental or for sale. Everybody's listing it. So when we first started looking at this about 1.5 years ago, we were typing in suburban addresses, which were not, you know, it wasn't like typing in Boston. We were looking at commercial real estate, Class C office space in Andover, Massachusetts, and all of those listings had WalkScores. We were sort of blown away. So this is playing into everybody who's thinking about real estate. What's pretty amazing is that a 10-point increase in WalkScore increases commercial property values by 5 to 8%. And the same is true for residential properties. Now, the dollar value depends on the market. Obviously, you know, the difference in value in the Boston market is higher than the difference in value in the Arkansas market. But nonetheless, basically across the country, an increase in WalkScore is an increase in real estate value. So, again, Fall River has a lot of assets to build on. There are lots and lots of walkable places in Fall River, but making sure that you're investing in that and thinking about that and using that as part of how you're thinking about the city is really important. So this is the premium that people, you know, research has shown for a walkable community. So the other thing that I think, again, is incredibly important in this era of very tight budgets is that this was CDC that did this research, but another set of findings just came out over the last week that the public is very, very supportive of investments in walkable communities. This is one of the things that people really want. They want to be able to walk. They want their children to be able to walk to their soccer practice, and they want their elderly parents to be able to walk to the grocery store. This is something that has a real impact on quality of life for everybody. Everybody that's not choosing, again, to live out in, you know, rural America, that's a different thing. But if you're living in a community where the opportunity exists to get around on foot, people really want that, and there is a lot of public support for those investments. So, and that's showing up over and over again, that there's community support for that, public support for that. So, how do we go about making walkable places? So, they need to be safe, they need to be interesting and fun, and they need to be comfortable. So, they don't need to be perfect, but they need to be okay. So, you need to be able to get across the street when you want to cross the street. Being faced with fast-moving traffic and no crosswalks is a big disincentive to walking. You need to be able to get around safely. You need to think about the relationship between parking and walking, because for almost all of us, many of our trips are going to be multimodal. They're going to involve both a car and your feet, or transit and your feet. So those connections are really, really important. Again, they don't have to be perfect, but they have to work, and they have to feel safe. This is one of my favorite slides because you know, I saw this in I was on a program with somebody else from Norwood. So this is a community where they've created a walkable place, a sidewalk, without taking away the parking that was in front of those stores. In other words, there wasn't actually enough space to basically get rid of all the curb cuts to get rid of the parking that was in front of those buildings. But they actually created a place so pedestrians felt like they had a place to walk. So this is a very low-key solution. And it's something that, you know, many, many communities find themselves in. You don't need to acquire lots of property. There are lots of creative ways to think about creating a more walkable, a safer place for people to get around. The little knockdown sign on the left, that is one of the most effective and least expensive ways to improve pedestrian safety. All the studies have shown that those middle of the street signs that you can take away in the winter that are temporary, you just put them out there, actually slow traffic down way more than the big installations on the side of the street. I think it's because it narrows the street, you know, it actually breaks the street into pieces, the cars have to go around it. It's very visible. This is where drivers are looking. They're not necessarily looking at those signs, or they see them the first few times they go by them and then they don't see them anymore. So this is a very effective tool. I used to say it cost $200, but somebody corrected me and said now they cost $500. So somewhere between $200 and $500. But they're very effective. Walking surfaces, making sure that there's a decent walking surface that's not bumpy. Bricks are a real problem for a lot of people. Walk Boston thinks bricks should be used as trim, not as the main walking surface, because almost no community has enough money to maintain brick sidewalks with the level of maintenance that you need to make them comfortable for walking. Lighting is very important, of course. So, interesting and enjoyable, what does that mean? Well, like I said, people like to walk where they see other people and see things going on. So, you want to be able to see into the places you walk by. It's very uncomfortable to walk by long, blank walls. I know that those of you who are in economic development are trying really hard to fill those storefronts that are empty. Well, there's some techniques to do that, temporary and pop-up things. We read about a community in, I think, Britain who bought that sort of paste-on wallpaper that looked like a lit-up interior of a store and put it on windows so that when people walk by, they, you know, the visual that you're walking by is that there's something going on inside the store. Of course, that's not the long-term solution that we want, but thinking about how to do that, how to generate interest. Making people want to be there. I love the knitting graffiti.
Yarn bombing.
Yeah, thank you, yarn bombing. There you go. The middle slide, I think, is a really interesting one. That is a street in Cleveland, which they closed just for the summer. So it's not closed, it's not a year-round pedestrian street, but they closed it in the summer, put up the lights and banners, and all the restaurants there put tables and chairs out to the middle of the street. The reason I think that's so interesting is I go to Cleveland once every few years because my husband has family there. And when I went to Cleveland, that's where the people that I was visiting took us to eat. I mean, this is like the place that people want to go. I think it's because it's special, it's seasonal, it's just a place for the summer, and all of the restaurants fill up the street and they've turned it into something special. There is nothing expensive about what's going on there. That's like, you know, holiday lights strung across the street and a barricade at the end of the street. And yet, that is where people go. So I think thinking about, you know, how do you make places special? How do you draw people? Variety, that's just really important. Having a mix of things going on, not a single purpose. And some things that draw people at different times of day. So if it's shopping, if it's food, whatever it is, civic uses, all of those things. But again, it doesn't have to be high-end. Pulling things outdoors, you know, creating informal places for people to sit. Benches, water fountains, shade. One of the top things that older people talk about is accessible bathrooms. Making sure that there's some public restrooms that people can have access to is very important. Again, that's very simple. If it's part of a program that the city is doing, maybe it's something that merchants would let people use. You know, just let it be known. It's not like you're going to have a line out the door for people to use the bathroom, but just, you know, that it's important, that it prevents people from coming and using places if there aren't public facilities. Maintenance is also hugely important. In some of, Walk Boston's done a lot of work in some of the lower income neighborhoods of the city of Boston. And the number one thing that we heard about from people was trash. As the biggest impediment to walking was seeing trash. And the reason I think that that was such a big impediment was that it makes the neighborhood feel unloved. You know, if the trash isn't getting picked up, that means that it doesn't feel safe, it doesn't feel comfortable. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be impeccable, but when you walk down the street and there's a lot of trash. So maintenance, snow shoveling, which is an issue, again, that we work a lot on. If you don't shovel the sidewalk, people can't use it. If people can't get out, they get trapped, and it's a huge impediment to mobility. So we have all these programs to encourage people to walk, to safe routes to schools, to get kids to walk to school, and then it snows and they can't walk and it's not safe. So that's really, really important, and you know, we've developed some ways to think about what social marketing, how do you convince people, how do you tell people how important it is, tell the stories. And the thing that really brought me to this issue is I went to a city council hearing in Boston, and there was a man in a wheelchair who said he had been trapped in his building for 12 days. After one of those awful storms when it sort of iced up. But, I mean, it's a human rights issue. And we work with human rights commissions on snow shoveling, in fact. It's a really big deal. So, thinking about that as you're thinking about walkability in a community. Separating people from moving cars. Again, this is, it's not rocket science, but a row of parked cars does that. On-street parking is a good thing in a lot of places, which doesn't mean, and I know Eric's going to talk a little bit about, you know, when you're competing for space, when things are really tight. But generally speaking, parking, a line of on-street parking is a good thing for walking. It segregates people from cars. So imagine that's like a 6-lane street. Imagine that cafe being there without that line of parked cars. No way. You know, it would feel scary. You'd be sitting next to fast-moving cars. The same is true when you're walking down the street. If the traffic's moving fast, the parked cars create a barrier. And then accommodating all modes. You know, thinking about bicycling, thinking about different speeds, slow speeds, you know, fully accessible sidewalks. All of that is critically important. So, where to start? And this is what I promised. There's some low-key ways to think about things. So, activating storefronts. Letting people see into the store, not having storefronts that are, you know, totally filled with stuff, with merchandise banked up against the windows so that you can't see into the store, you can't see that people are going in and out. You know, nice storefronts. I mean, actually one of our board members was talking about there was a new used clothing store in his neighborhood, which was doing great window displays. And it actually got other stores along the same street to do great window displays, just because it was sort of like an internally generated competition. This was at no cost. You know, there was some employee in that store who said, you know, I'm going to have fun with all this stuff and do fun windows, and they change, and then, you know, the next store down the street did. So again, that's just easy and inexpensive. Funny things. People love whimsy. So this, I don't know what you call it, sculpture? On the left, apparently it was put out, it was supposed to be part of like a 2-week display, and it was so popular that the city left it out all summer because people just loved it. There were always people hanging out on it and sitting on it, and you know, I don't know what it's made out of, but it's probably plywood and you know, AstroTurf, thank you. And then the Duplo dog, one of my personal favorites. Again, just getting things out there, letting people play with the street, the urban scene. These are 2 great ideas. They're really interactive. They cost almost nothing, and but in this case, they were both projects by an artist where they were trying to find out what people wanted to see in the community. So one of them is literally a chalkboard. I don't know if you know this, but you can get spray paint to turn basically a piece of plywood into a chalkboard. The other one is with stickies. But basically letting people interact with their environment, whatever the question is, you know, post a question and get it out there, and people, this is what brings people out. They like to interact with their community. Interactive technology. Again, this is happening everywhere, you know, QR codes on your phones with information, you know, having, I mean, there's a lot of audio tours popping up all over the place where, you know, there's a number to call and then you learn the history of the neighborhood. Again, it's incredibly inexpensive to develop, and that's incredibly easy to use, and practically everybody walking down the street has a cell phone. So, how do you start? You start small and you build over time. So pop-up retail, temporary retail. Now, some of it, I think it's funny, we have this new name, pop-up retail, but that's what a farmer's market is, right? It's retail that comes once a week. That's pop-up retail. I don't know, does Fall River have farmers markets in a few places? 3 of them? Does it activate the place? Do people come back over and over? So one of the things that the research has shown is that people that come on foot and by bike are actually the people that spend the most money in local retail areas. It's not people who drive. People who are coming on foot come repetitively. Most of them live relatively nearby. That's who comes back. That's who the customers are that spend the most money. So that's really important for merchants to think about. People that drive and park, most of the drivers going down the street are actually just driving through. Some of them, of course, are parking. And it's different, you know, if you're talking about a big grocery store where people are, you know, doing a week's shopping. But for smaller retail, for downtown, for town center retail, it's the people that are there on foot that are spending the most money. So that's important to think about, and also to think about what the temporary uses are, you know, whether it's a holiday store or just something that comes in, some specialty retail that's aligned with some, you know, if there's a summer festival that goes on, you know, what are the things that could happen there just to get things going. This is one of our favorite examples. This, of course, is Times Square, so it's not Fall River and it's not even Boston. But what we love about this picture is testing things, testing infrastructure changes in an incredibly inexpensive way, okay? So New York City put out, you know, the traffic, I was going to call them cones, but traffic barrels, thank you. And the cheapest, you know, folding lawn furniture that you can get, and tested, could they make changes in the street patterns in New York, in this case in Times Square, and add space for pedestrians and reduce space for vehicles. And they tested it like this. Now, in the meantime, it's been turned into something permanent. But they did tests in other parts of the city where they didn't turn it. It wasn't permanent. So thinking about how do you do something, how do you see if it works, how do you check it out, if you see how popular it is, whether people like it, you can do it with almost no money. This is an idea. This is not an infrastructure investment, and that's really important. And again, it's something that I think people like. Now, of course, in this particular case, they created this space, and it was occupied by people immediately. There was clearly a huge demand for this. So, low-cost events, you know, spontaneous things generated by, you know, local artists, local kids, you know, cell phone, notice, get people out there, play music. I mean, this doesn't cost anything to speak of. And we looked around the country to find some fun ideas that people have. So in Grand Rapids, Michigan, they have a paper airplane contest every summer. Okay, the capital cost is $1,000, I presume, for the paper and the cleanup afterwards. I didn't know about this. Did you know that Lowell has a human dog sled race? Probably not this year. There wasn't any snow, but anyway. A scavenger hunt, where the things that you're finding are, you know, that's like clues you have to fill, and one of them was like dipping the corner of the program in a cup of coffee. So you didn't have to buy anything, but it just gets the merchants working together. It's, you know, one day that you bring people out and they go out and have fun and find funny things. And then this, which is actually my absolute favorite. So the picture on the right, Feast. This is an event that, it's a community dinner where, for those of you who've tried to generate donations, the easiest thing in the world to get donated is food. Local restaurants like to donate food. So if you have an event and you put their name up, you can get food donations. So people paid, well, let's say $20 or $30 to go to this dinner. And then at the dinner, 6 art projects were presented. There was a committee that reviewed art projects. 6 artists were selected. They came and presented their art projects. And the gate, the $20 or $30 that people paid for dinner, all went to the winning art project. So the people at the dinner voted which of the 6 projects they liked, and the dinner itself generated a budget that the artists then got to implement the project in the community. So it's like, the event itself is community enlivening, and then the community ends up with a project that's going to get implemented in the community. It's just a fantastic idea. Basically, you know, you need organizing, but you don't need any money really, except that you then end up with some capital dollars to invest in your own community. So again, starting off small, thinking about how do we create excitement and bring people out. So just what we said before, you know, customers, employers, property values, public sector savings, all of these things are benefited by better walking, and there are lots of ways to do it that are inexpensive and you can start out easily. So, and Walk Boston can help. Think about it. So, thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer some questions. This is the brochure that has sort of the data that I was talking about, and you know what, I'll just leave a pile of them here and you guys can have them. So one of the things that Walk Boston works with communities to do is to make walking maps. The maps are really a way of marketing walking. It's not so much that we do some that have sort of interesting routes or history or something, but many of them are really, we work with local health departments and others who are trying to promote walking. So for example, this is a map to show people how easy it is to walk. You know, Americans have gotten so used to coming out of their house and getting in their car and driving that they forget. They don't know how easy it is to walk around. And so what this does is say not so much that this is the perfect walking route, but rather it says to somebody who lives here, oh my goodness, you know, if I look at this, it's only a 10-minute walk for me to get from my house to whatever the particular, you know, to the library, the school, or whatever. So this is, we've done this for a lot of communities.
I think one of the groundbreaking pieces on that too is the idea that it's not distance on the map, it's time. So people really can't relate, this is a 3/4 of a mile walk.
Right.
What does that mean? So the way that mapping is done is on the street there are little nodes, and each node represents 5 minutes. Right, so you can really quickly say, oh, I can make it to this next transit stop, or wherever I can be there in 10 minutes, because you can pick it up right away. I think that's great, the way those are put
And
together.
so it's also in multiple languages. This is the first, and actually only one so far we've done in Chinese, but we do many of our maps in many languages. The information, like I said, some of them, we do have maps that talk about historic sites and things that are more traditional on sort of walking route maps, but this is really about walking for health and enjoyment and how to get out there and walk. And I also brought a brochure along that we have called Making Streets Safe, which talks about some of the things that you do to slow traffic down and make it safe for people to walk around. And those are all, of course, important elements of making a walkable community.
We're talking about walk score. Walk score, you said, is driven by land use. You know, and it's a very quantitative way of associating property value and land value with the quality of your streetscape. And I would say that land use is really driven by transportation, meaning what's happening is related exactly to the type of street you have, the width of the street, the carrying capacity. And most transportation, sort of two categories, it's either rail or it's street. Those are the two categories you have. So you have walk score being driven by the land use, and the land use being driven in large part by the transportation solutions. And in this map of the project area, what you see in this kind of cyan or almost teal color is the rail line through the center of the project. Of course, the river, 8 miles of river frontage from one end to the other to the city. Our project area is this orange line through the center. And then these yellow streets are connections down into the project area. Some of them are certainly more walkable than others. It was nice, I was thinking, you know, Fall River's already done this. You know, Columbia Street is already, you know, it's already the place to walk. So the goal of this project is to introduce the city to some ideas of, this is great, and the fact that you have this park and you have these pink walking loops that already exist, how do you get people to come through these gateways, Almond, Central, come through these gateways, Punta Delgada, and come down into the waterfront district, and that's what we're going to talk about in the second half of the workshop.
Is that the three? You need 3, right?
Yeah, and I don't know, you know, we talked about trying to get you